If you go through your anime watch history right now, you'll find countless shows that have slave collars, slave crests, demon servants, human livestock, or literally slave markets, or at least consistent themes about slavery with no regard to the complexity or the gravity of the theme. Now remember, this is supposed to be a medium that's entertainment, sometimes even meant for children. Yeah, we need to talk. I'm not talking about one edgy show that pushes boundaries. I'm not even talking about 10 shows. I'm talking about a consistent pattern that's so normalized in anime that most of you didn't even notice it until I just pointed it out. Here's my thesis. In one sentence, anime has a slavery problem. It shows up constantly. It's often sexualized or treated as just world building, and the fan defense around it is basically proof on how normalized it's become. And before the comments flood in with the "it's just fiction, bro," or "you're too sensitive," that reaction, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the symptom right there. So let's break down exactly how deep this goes, why it matters, and what it reveals about the medium we all claim to love. Let's start with the most obvious offender, the isekai, slave-harem subgenre. And yes, that's a real subgenre with enough shows to fill an entire streaming category. In The Rising of the Shield Hero, Naofumi literally buys Raphtalia as a child slave, keeps the slave crest on her even after she chooses to stay with him, and the show frames this as wholesome romance. She was 10 years old when he bought her. Harem in the Labyrinth of Another World. The Japanese title literally translates to Slave Harem in the Labyrinth of the Other World. Not even hiding it. The main character buys Roxanne and then multiple other women as combat and sex slaves, and it's sold as wish fulfillment with "I treat them nicely, so it's fine." Mushoku Tensei, beast folk slavery, is baked into the world building. Kidnapped, caged, sold at markets, whole arcs about slave raids and rescue missions. But the visual language is heavy. Collars, cages, children being trafficked, how to summon a demon lord. Summoning ritual backfires. Both heroines end up with slave collars, bound to the main character. Played entirely for comedy and fan service, the collars are treated like cute accessories. Redo of Healer. Do I even need to explain this one? Slave markets, demi-humans, night slaves, mind-breaking people into obedient toys, slavery, rape, and control aren't just themes, they are the aesthetic of the entire show. And I could keep going. The list goes on and on. Death March, Arifureta, In Another World with My Smartphone, Seirei, Gensouki, Reincarnated as a Sword, Tsukimichi, Golden Swordmaster. Enchained Soldier literally has slave in the Japanese title. That guy becomes a combat slave to a unit of women, framed as sexy domination play. This isn't a handful of edgy outliers. This is a genre with conventions, tropes, and dedicated fan base. Now some of you are thinking, okay, sure, trashy isekai, but the good shows don't do this. If you thought that, you'd be wrong. One Piece, celestial dragons keep human and fishermen slaves. Slave auctions on Sabaudi. Slave brands burned into people's backs. Yes, the show condemns it, but it's still consistent. Vinland Saga. Straight historical slavery. Farm slaves bought, sold, worked to death. Einar and Arnhide's entire character arcs. The Promised Neverland. Children raised as livestock for demons. Branded, graded, penned like cattle, and waiting for slaughter. Made in Abyss. The Edo Front arc. Children turned into living relics, traded and sacrificed. Bodies used as raw materials. Total dehumanization. Black Lagoon. Child trafficking. Sex slavery. Romanian Twins arc. Yakuza brothels. Attack on Titan. Eldian internment. Armbands. Forced military conscription. Not called slavery, but functionally it's radicalized forced labor as cannon fodder. Hunter x Hunter. York New human trafficking auctions. Chimera ants literally farming and ranking humans as food. Just let it sink in for a moment. You see the pattern now? This isn't niche. This isn't underground. These are mainstream, popular, critically acclaimed shows, and they're all soaked in imagery of people being owned. Here's what really bothers me. It's not just that slavery appears. It's how these shows frame it. Let me break down the 4 patterns you see over and over again. Pattern 1. The nice master fantasy. Shield hero. Parts of the Mushoku Tensei. They all run the same play. Guy buys slave girls, treats her kindly. Suddenly, it's romance. The collar stays on, but the narrative tells you she wants this. She's choosing her chains. This is grooming logic dressed up as wholesomeness. Pattern 2. It's just the setting excuse. Slave markets and branded demi-humans treated like background furniture or items. Given the excuse, that's just how medieval fantasy worlds work, bro. That's called having zero systemic critique. These settings are often fictional fantasy. Adding these taboo themes is completely unnecessary. Generally, they add nothing to the world building of the story and are fetishizing. Pattern 3. Edgy spice in trauma porn. Chains, child cages, used to signal, quote, mature gritty storytelling, then barely engaged with beyond giving the main character an excuse for revenge or fetish shots. Redo of Healer is the poster child, but Goblin Slayer and parts of the Berserk adaptations, even Shield Hero, dips into this. The suffering is the point. It's a fucking spectacle. Pattern 4. Livestock metaphor for humans. Promised Neverland. Tokyo Ghoul. Maiden Abyss. Hunter x Hunter. Chimera ant arc. People in literal cages. Compared to animals, graded like meat. But here's the thing. Years of content where collars, ownership, and slave markets are either sexy, funny, or just world-building wallpaper. What do you think that does to your brain? I'm not saying anime directly causes slavery. I'm not saying watching Shield Hero turns you into a human trafficker. What I am saying is this. When your immediate, knee-jerk reaction to criticism of fictional slavery is to defend the slavery instead of asking why you're so attached to it, that's not media literacy, that's indoctrination. Just look at the fan responses whenever anyone brings this up. You're met with, "You're too sensitive, it's just fantasy." It's historically accurate for medieval worlds. It's part of the theme. The author is actually criticizing slavery by showing it. These aren't defenses of good storytelling. These are excuses, and they reveal something uncomfortable. A lot of anime fans have been so thoroughly marinated in this imagery that they've stopped questioning it completely. And you know what's wild? Go read about actual modern slavery, forced labor, debt bondage, human trafficking, migrant exploitation. It exists right now, millions of people. But if your mental backlog is warped by wholesome master and loyal slave girl stories, you're primed to downplay how bad the real thing actually is. And that's the problem. Fiction doesn't exist in a vacuum. The stories we normalize in entertainment shape how we emotionally process real-world issues. There's a difference between depicting something and normalizing it. Good works show slavery and make you hate the concept. Vinland Saga mostly lands here. But a lot of modern isekai show slavery and make you want a cute collared waifu. Those are not even close to being the same. Now here's where this gets really uncomfortable, and it's something most anime fans have zero idea about. Japan has a long, messy history with slavery, and I don't just mean ancient history. Going back to the Yamato period, 3rd century onward, Japan had formal slave systems where people could be bought and sold as property. Even after legal abolition, unfree labor kept morphing. Bonded peasants, trafficked women, and later, during the Empire era, forced labor in Korea, China, and Southeast Asia, and among prisoners of war. The thing that barely gets talked about is the comfort women system From 1932 to 1945, the Imperial Japanese military ran a network of military brothels where tens of thousands of women from occupied territories were forced into sexual slavery. Korean women, Chinese women, Filipino women, Indonesian women, coerced, kidnapped, deceived into what they were told were factory jobs, then trapped in rape camps for soldiers. This isn't ancient history. There are survivors still alive, still fighting for recognition and apologies. Now, how does this correlate to anime? Well, after the war, there's been a decades-long political fight in Japan over how much of this appears in school textbooks. Some publishers, who include straightforward descriptions of wartime sexual slavery, were pressured to soften or delete those sections. The government has approved textbook edits that removed explicit references to sex slaves and downplayed coercion. The UN and international scholars have repeatedly criticized Japan for whitewashing wartime sexual slavery in education. I'm not saying Japanese schools teach nothing about this, but a lot of Japanese students only get a sanitized or vague version. The most brutal parts are contested, euphemized, are pushed to the margins of the curriculum. So let me connect the dots for you. You have a country with a real documented history of sexual slavery. You have a school system that often whitewashes that history or treats it as politically controversial. And then you have a modern pop culture where slavery is everywhere, from serious historical shows to horny isekai power fantasies, and it's treated as normal, romantic, or just background noise. And you think that has zero effect on how people emotionally process this topic? Yeah, okay. You know what really crystallized this for me? Sugar Apple Fairy Tale. It's a shoujo series marketed to young women. Romance, pretty art, fantasy world building. Here's the premise. In this world, fairies exist and humans enslave them. How? They cut off one of the fairy's wings and keep it as a control talisman. If the fairy disobeys, the human can crush the wing to torture them. If they destroy it completely, the fairy dies. The protagonist, Anne, is a young craftswoman who buys a warrior fairy named Seirei as a slave bodyguard. She promises she'll eventually free him, and over the course of the story, they fall in love. It's framed as romantic, as progressive, because she's, quote, one of the good masters who treats him with respect. Aw, isn't that beautiful? She only partially mutilated him and holds his literal life in her hands, but she's nice about it, so it's fine. So romantic. And fans of the show will actually defend this, saying things like it's a metaphor, or it's about challenging the system from within, or Anne is actually anti-slavery. She bought a slave. The romance is built on ownership, and the power dynamic is permanent until the very end. And this is a shoujo series. This is the stuff being marketed to young women as aspirational romance. You want to know why I'm making this video? That's why. Every time someone brings this up, the responses are predictable. They'll say things like, it's just fiction, or it doesn't hurt anyone. The reality is, fiction influences culture, and culture influences behavior. This isn't controversial or new. It's how stories have always worked. That's why propaganda exists. That's why representation matters. That's why we celebrate stories that challenge bigotry and criticize stories that reinforce it. People will argue, you're trying to cancel anime. No, I'm trying to get you to think about what you're consuming and why it's so prevalent. Criticism isn't cancellation. But what about Western media? Doesn't that feature slavery? Yes, it does. But what about ism? Isn't a defense. Yes, other media has problems too. That doesn't make this okay, and frankly, Western media gets criticized for this stuff all the time. Anime fans need to stop acting like their medium should be exempt. People will try to argue, the author is Japanese, you're forcing Western values. Oh, so we're doing cultural relativism for slavery now. Cool. Very normal response. Definitely not proving my point about desensitization. Here's the thing, I'm not saying you're a bad person for watching these shows. I've watched a bunch of them myself. What I'm asking is, can we at least acknowledge that this is weird? That maybe, just maybe, the sheer volume of slavery in anime, especially slavery framed as sexy or romantic or convenient, is worth examining. Can we admit that slave-harem isekai, being an entire subgenre, is fucked up? And just to drive my point home, let me machine gun some examples so you understand the scale. Skeleton Knight in Another World, anti-slavery isekai, but still shows constant slave markets and chained beast folks. Tsukimichi Moonlight Fantasy, main followers call themselves his slaves via magical contracts. Death March to the Parallel World, main character buys multiple enslaved girls. Seirei Gensouki, kid assassin slaves, brothel slaves, all used for pathos. Reincarnated as a sword, Fran starts as an abused slave with a shock collar. Now and then, here and there, warlord kidnapping kids, turning them into child soldiers and breeding stock. Goblin Slayer, repeated scenes of captives as breeding stock. Tokyo Ghoul, humans kept as livestock by rich ghouls. Golden Kamui, forced labor in mines, exploitation of Ainu prisoners. Dorororo, children sold off, villages sacrificed. Code Geass, 11s are occupied underclass, functionally serfs. Naruto, Hyuga branch house with caged bird seals, literally enslaving an entire family branch. I could keep going. The list goes on and on and on. This is everywhere. And if your response is still, so what? Then congratulations. You've been fully desensitized and completely indoctrinated. So, in the end, here's my actual argument, stripped of all the examples. 1. Slavery appears in anime with shocking frequency, across genres, across target demographics, across studios. 2. It is often framed in ways that minimize, romanticize, or fetishize, or simply normalize the concept of human ownership. 3. When fans are confronted with this pattern, the most common response isn't, yeah, that's weird, or maybe we should examine that. It's immediate defensiveness and dismissal. 4. That response in itself, evidence of desensitization. If the pattern didn't affect you, you wouldn't feel the need to defend it so aggressively. 5. Japan has a real history with slavery and sexual slavery that is often downplayed or sanitized in education, which creates a cultural context where fictional slavery is less emotionally charged than it would be elsewhere. And finally, 6. This isn't about banning anything. It's about asking the industry and the fandom to have some fucking self-awareness. Why is slave harem a genre? Why are callers shorthand for romance in so many isekai? Why do we keep seeing child slaves purchased by adult protagonists and it's framed as heartwarming? These aren't rhetorical questions. These are things we should have answers for. I love anime. I've been watching it for years. Some of my favorite stories are anime. But love doesn't mean blind loyalty. Real love means being willing to criticize the thing you care about when it's hurting people or perpetuating harmful ideas. And I'm tired of pretending this isn't a problem just because it makes people uncomfortable to talk about. I'm tired of seeing shows that treat slavery as a romance trope. I'm tired of seeing fans defend it with the same recycled excuses. I'm tired of watching the medium I love pump out show after show where collars and cages are just normal. If you genuinely think this is all fine, that I'm overreacting, that it's harmless fun, ask yourself why you're so invested in that belief. What are you actually defending? I'm not saying ban every anime with slavery. I'm saying stop pretending it's harmless wallpaper. When a medium leans this hard on slavery as fetish, decor, or relationship shortcuts, and its fans get angry if you even question it, that's not just storytelling anymore. That's a symptom of something broken. So here's what I want from you. 1. Next time you see slavery in an anime, ask yourself, is this necessary? What is this adding? How is it being framed? 2. When somebody criticizes this trope, don't immediately jump to, it's just fiction. Engage with the actual argument. 3. Demand better. Studios make what sells. If fans stop accepting lazy slave harem slop, the industry will adapt. And if you disagree with me, if you think I'm wrong, great, tell me in the comments. But actually think about it first. Don't just copy paste the same defenses we've all heard 1,000 times. Because this conversation, it's long overdue. Thanks for watching this anime critical analysis. Hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this.